All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. So thank you for joining this evening. I am Emily Ranson. I'm the Maryland Director for Clean Water Action and Clean Water Fund. We are a national organization focused on drinking water quality and grassroots organizing. Over the last several years, our focus on Maryland's trash policy has brought us again and again to this issue of, well, what are we going to do about the trash? What are we going to do with all this waste that we generate? Is there something we can do better than just dumping it in a landfill or burning it in an incinerator? And composting has been a continual theme. It is a way that we can take certain types of trash and turn it into a good product for our soils. And farms are very much a natural place for turning manure and food scraps into compost, where it can then be used to supplement fertilizers to grow crops and sequesters carbon back into the ground. So this feeds the cycle. And we're very excited to have with us tonight Keith Ohlinger. Keith is a farmer in Howard County. He is a compost veteran who has been working in the compost space a lot longer than I have. As I said, a relatively recent advocate in this space as we've followed the progression of our work. And we started really working with Keith last year while working on an on-farm composting bill that was looking to expand the ability of farmers to accept off-site food scraps and incorporate it into their manure piles. And I'll be the first to say, from the environmental side, we were initially a little concerned, okay, what is this permit exemption? What is this going to mean? How is this going to be done safely? And in learning about this process, learning about how things are done, learning about many of the existing guardrails that exist, many of us in the environmental community came from, cautiously interested to enthusiastically supportive. And so I'm, so glad that Keith was willing to come out, spend an evening with us, do this webinar to really talk about and put really present to all of us, especially those of us who live in urban and suburban, Maryland or Virginia or DC, what does this actually mean? When you get a truckload of corn scraps or whatever it is, how does composting on a farm work? How does it get you the materials that you need, and what type of role does it play in not just, our waste system, but also that broader picture of keeping carbon out of getting into the atmosphere? So Keith, thank you very much. I'll let you kind of take it away. Oh, I guess in terms of housekeeping for participants, if you have a tech need, some sort of technology problem, you need to get a hold of me, you can email me. My email did not work most of today, but it is back up just in time. So thank goodness. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the question and answer tab. So at the bottom of Zoom, that is the Q&A. Okay, now I will let you take it away.
Well, thank you all so much for allowing me to be with you tonight. And thank you, Emily. And yeah, Emily, if you can just let me know if there's a chat or a question that comes up. I think we left time at the end here for questions and stuff if we need to. So I'll try and go through. So just please put your stuff in there as you go, and we'll try to answer it at the end, so that way we can stay on track here. And I'm happy to go over time if we need to. There's no problem if there's a conversation folks want to have. So thank you again. My name is Keith Ohlinger. Our farm is here in Central Maryland in Howard County. It's called Porchview Farm, and historically, I'm the last of our branch of the family of farmers. We've been farming for as far back as we can trace into Germany, over 400 years. Our family came to the colonies in 1741 into Pennsylvania. And we've been here ever since. And I like to joke that I'm the first export. We settled in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and I left to come to Maryland. So I jokingly say I'm the first export. So just to try and set the frame of mind here for you to think about what we're talking about as we go through tonight, I want you to think of what you ate today and think about what you may have in your kitchen, whether in your freezer, in your pantry, in your refrigerator, and just think about what's there and what you ate today. And then I want you to think about how much of that food did you hunt, fish for, gather, raise, grow on your own versus what you purchased or what you went to the store for. And then think about if you didn't have a store, you didn't have anywhere to go, how long could you survive on what you are able to provide for yourself? And oftentimes when you put it in those terms, a lot of folks are a little shocked if they think about it, that, wow, I really, there's not much. I wouldn't last long, if I had to. And most people in today's age, at least in our area, don't spend much of their time worrying about how they're going to get their food that they're going to eat today, how much of their day is going to be spent trying to track down food. And that's because, for the most part, people like me are taking care of that for you. So in the United States, we're at roughly less than 1% of the population is raising the food for everybody else. And we're happy to do that. That's fine. But you have to understand what we've traded resiliency for efficiency. And we have a very efficient system, but as you saw during COVID, if there's any glitches in that supply chain, suddenly the grocery stores run empty and folks start to run out of food. And, historically, that has not been the case. There was very vibrant, very strong local agriculture and a system in place to prevent that. But we are very concerned about that. There are those of us that spend most of their time trying to figure out, how do we raise, grow, how do we get enough food, clothing, building materials, and energy for an ever-growing population without destroying the planet in the process, at a time when most people aren't interested or have any desire to do any of it on their own. And so it becomes a big challenge for those of us that are trying to do that. How do we make that happen? And if you think about the process of humanity and the blip that we are historically on the radar, there used to be a closed loop system. Something would go from the farm to the people, and then whatever was left over, whether it was manure, whether it was wood, whether it was straw, whether it was remnants of food, that would then come back out to the farms and be used to help recreate and keep that cycle going. Unfortunately, today, we now have a cycle that goes from the farm to the consumer to the landfill. And so what we're trying to do is we're literally looking at the survival and the preservation of our species when we're talking about some of these things. We're trying to get things back into that closed loop cycle and out of just sending it somewhere thinking, well, now it's in the dump, it's gone. And the history on this is fascinating. I'm going to try and show you, some books here. Here's one. It's called Black Gold: Pre-Columbian Farming on terra preta anthrosols in the Amazon area. You know, thousands of years pre-Columbus, folks used that closed loop system, made compost. In a more modern, you know, country, China, this is Farmers of 40 Centuries, Organic Farming in China, Korea, and Japan. There's another book. There's a huge amount of history here on composting. So please understand, it's not in any way a new thing. It's not some, you know, new process we've been doing my entire life. I'm going to be 54 in August. We've always had a compost pile. We've always composted on historically in our family for as long as we can remember and discuss it. So this is not something new. And when we're looking at a hierarchy from a farming perspective, we're talking about if we're raising food for someone, we want that food to go to those people that we're raising it for. If for some reason it can't, if we can reroute it through a food recovery program and get it to hungry people, you know, that's what we want. If for some reason we can't get it there and it's not going to be safe anymore for human consumption, we can try and get it to livestock and feed it to livestock. Now, usually, you know, it's still safe enough for livestock for a while yet after that for what we more consider with human consumption. But if you can't safely get it to humans, you can't safely get it to livestock, well, then we can compost it. And essentially, we're trying to keep that out of the landfill because we don't want to be producing the methane. We want to conserve the carbon. We want to keep those nutrients. You know, there's no reason to have to, you know, if I as a farmer can get a readily available nutrient, there's no reason then for me to have to go out and buy it, you know, or no reason for me to have to dig it out of the ground in a limited resource when we have this renewable resource that's available to us. So that's kind of the hierarchy that we're trying to aim for there. And so that's what some of these bills that we worked on, the one that Emily was talking about, I had worked on for over a decade, and we've you know, we're able to help with that because essentially the farmers are making compost anyway. There's no sense for my neighbor to throw away their food scraps if I'm right there making the compost right next door. You know, let's get this stuff back in the ground. Now, this isn't going to be a master class on how to make compost or anything like that. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I could talk about this for weeks on end because I love it. I'm very nerdy and geeky about getting into the details. So Emily, what would you know, that's kind of the basics of setting us up. What would you like me to talk about, you know, at this point? We can go in any direction you want.
Yeah, so, you know, under the current permit exemption, farmers are allowed to compost manure and on-site generated food scraps up to 40,000 square feet. I guess the question there is like, what does that look like on a farm?
Well,
how does that get managed?
Okay, well, let's talk about that here a little bit. I'm going to try and share my screen and see if we can go into some of that here. So let me know if that comes up all right. Are you able to see that?
So I see the MDE website. Yep.
Okay. So let's start there. MDE, our Maryland Department of Environment, has a really great page. It's organics, diversion, and composting. And if you scroll down, you can see there's some community composting 101 online. There's a whole host of resources that are there. Talks about some of the history, some of the bills. I served on several of these in both the county and at the state level for working with it. It has the regulations, what people need to follow if they're having a composting facility. Here's some of the food scrap collection programs, some fact sheets, other resources. Here's kind of that food management hierarchy that I was discussing with you a minute ago. And then there's some other information that's available on a whole host of different things. And then here, if you're really, want to get into, can't have trouble sleeping at night and you want to know what we all did in a lot of these bills and with the reports and the studies and everything, you can look at the different bills and work group reports that were put out. And then there's some other contact information down there at the bottom. But so within that page, I'll give you just a brief, I got to move this one screen out of the way here. So hold on a second. Go over here. So there's a few different levels that we can talk about here. This is one of the resources that's on the page that I just mentioned. And as I said, this is a long history of composting. And so when MDE started to make their regulations and codify them, there was a lot of effort to try and fit them into the already existing practices that were out there. So several things. There's community gardens, there's backyard composters, there's on-farm composting, there's giant facilities that can make compost on a much larger scale. And so the attempt was, we wanted to regulate where things may be necessary, but we also wanted to make sure we weren't interfering with the way things already were and working just fine without any issues. And so one of them was, obviously, we wanted to help with the backyard folks and the community gardens and that sort of thing. And so there was a 5,000 square foot limit put on to allow for folks that wanted to do that. So if you were under that, you didn't need a compost facility permit. Then the next level up was on-farm composting. Well, there are several tiers, and as Emily mentioned, we worked on that bill this year, which kind of gave us an additional tier, but it's under the separate part in the law and the code. So if you are a farm that can provide all your materials, so we're going to generally talk about carbon and nitrogen, which is essentially the different components of what your recipe, if you think of it as a cooking recipe, what you're going to put in your compost pile to make it work. If you are large enough to be able to provide everything you need, your compost facility could be unlimited in size. The challenge with that is most farms cannot generate enough carbon. So in the terms of woody biomass or leaves or whatever you want to talk about as far as carbon, that is usually the limiting factor for a farm. If they're going to generate all their own compost, they just can't get enough carbon. The general ratios, and you can tweak the recipe to be specific to what you're trying to raise. So there are certain crops that might prefer a more fungal balance of your compost versus some that require more bacterial. And so you can go, 20-1 to 50-1 and play around with that in there to get what you need as far as a carbon to nitrogen ratio to get your pile going what you want to do. If you start bringing things in from off-site, then you're looking at falling under the 40,000 square foot regulation. And so that then includes materials from on-site, you get leaves, grass, animal manure and bedding. In worst case scenario, you can also, if there's an emergency, you can also compost your animal mortalities if you have an animal die. And then you just have to abide by all the regulations. And then we have to have, on most farms today, if you have more than 8 1,000-pound, what they call animal units, and or $2,500 in gross sales, which means $2,500 in gross sales, which is very easy to meet. So it's most farms in Maryland require a nutrient management plan if you hit those levels. And then you also would need a soil and water conservation plan or an agricultural waste management plan. In our case, here on our farm, we have a nutrient management plan and we have a soil and water conservation plan. And then if you're bringing in food scraps, the previous regulation was if you're bringing in food scraps, well, then you would have to stay under the 5,000 square feet requirement. Now, for us on our farm, so you had 3 levels there. Essentially, you had the unlimited, you're providing all your own stuff. You're using things within the organic category of generated on another farm controlled by the same operator, animal manure and bedding. And type 1 feedstocks was essentially the yard waste. Then you could go up to 40,000 square feet. If you were doing food scraps, then you had to go down to 5,000 square feet. Well, for our farm, because we had livestock and as part of our nutrient management plan, we were making compost to deal with the animal manure. I could not, even though I could take the food scraps, we had all the equipment and the system in place to do it. If I did that, I would have to ratchet down to the 5,000 square feet. And that was too small of an area for me to be able to manage my manure from the livestock. So we weren't able to take food scraps from the local population because of that. So the bill that we worked on this year allows us to go up to 10,000 square feet with taking food scraps. And so for most people, and that is in the active side of the composting, not in the entire footprint of the operation. So that helps a great deal with being able to do enough that it makes sense to take it, take food scraps. And so that again, this is a page that's available to anybody. It's on the website there. As far as what does it look like, now that to go back and kind of answer your question, here's some other resources for farmers in case there's any farmers out there. Again, this is on that website. If you'd like to look at regulations, there is a section of that entitled regulations. You can go, it has all the different numbers for the various regulations. So you can just click on that and it'll give you a full read. You can read everything that it talks about. And so here under 26.04.11.06, you see it talks about on-farm composting facilities and permits required. And it's essentially the legal side of what I read to you that was in the document just now. But if we go back over here, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to, in my farm, we started out using a front end loader on a tractor. We eventually got a grant from our local county, Howard County Economic Development Authority. I got a grant through the Ag Innovation Program that they offer. And they gave me some money, and then that money was matched by Marbidco. And I was able to purchase a compost windrow turner called the Mighty Mike that attaches to the back of the tractor. In the amount of time, it would take me maybe 8 hours to turn the different piles if we were, turning everything all at once. And the windrow turner reduced that down to about 10 minutes for the whole operation. So it was a huge time savings to be able to do that. And what we were doing was you're checking as part of all those plans, you are regularly checking your temperatures of your pot. And so you take your ingredients, you put your pile together, and if you think of it as a living entity, it's not like a horse or a cow in those terms, but I like to think of it as a child. You would never leave your child alone for 2 weeks to fend for themselves. You wouldn't leave your compost pile alone for 2 weeks either. You want to constantly be checking on it, and the regulations require it. So you're checking your temperatures, and what you're trying to do, you're trying to make sure that you have the proper moisture and that you have the proper oxygen, in addition to making sure your ingredients are the right ratios. And what you're looking for is you're trying to turn those piles, and in the regulations that we have in Maryland, you're trying to get them at roughly 131 degrees or hotter, which is 55 degrees Celsius or hotter. And you want that for 15 days or longer. And the regulation, I have it right up there as far as pathogen reduction. And you want to turn it a minimum of 5 times within that time frame. Now, if you look at the national organic standards under compost, if you look at that, the compost pile is mixed and managed to ensure all feedstock heats to a minimum of 135 or 55 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 3 days. So based on the Maryland regulations, if you're doing it that way, your compost could be certified as organic if you're using the proper ingredients. So there are certain requirements that the national organic standards require. You can't have, plastic trash and those types of things in your organic. And there's a whole host of regulations on what qualifies as organic. But if you're following those regulations from the organic side and you're following these regulations, you could certify your compost as organic, which is great. So that's roughly what we're doing. We're essentially just putting a big thermometer. Mine is about 3 foot long. You're sticking it in your pile at different depths, making sure your temperatures are hot enough. Now, I've never had an issue with getting a pile hot enough. That if you're keeping your moisture right and you've got your right ingredients up front, it's usually not an issue. You're just making sure you're turning, and the reason is now they have piles where you can. It's called a static pile, and they have air pumps that pump air in, so that you don't have to turn it. It's just in my case, I have a windrow turner, and so that's what I'm looking for to turn it. You're trying to get the pile turned to get oxygen into the pile, and you're trying to rotate. You want to make sure the entire pile gets heated up over that time because you're trying to kill pathogens, you're trying to kill weed seeds, all that sort of stuff. And you want to take that outer part, which is going to be cooler, and the windrow turner has paddles on it that are angled in different ways, so that you're taking that inside of the pile, throwing it to the outside, throwing the outside pile to the inside. And so you're constantly cycling that around the pile so that by the time you're done, everything has been heated up enough to kill all that stuff that you don't want. And so that turning, you're also introducing oxygen. And again, we're talking about living things, and you want the fungal mass and your bacteria that are breaking down the ingredients of your pile, you want them to have oxygen. Now, to break things down in the environment, you don't need oxygen. Many of these things are called facultative anaerobes, and they can actually work in a low oxygen environment. The problem is that's not healthy for plants. That can create alcohols and other things that can kill plants. It stinks. That's not a well-managed pile. So what we are talking about here is actively managed, oxygenated, aerobic composting. Okay. So that's a key point, because a lot of people, I was watching a cartoon the one day when my daughter was little, and they were talking about, the compost, that stinks. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. For God's sakes, if you're managing it right, it shouldn't smell bad at all, So anyway, so that's a little bit about how that process works. And that was a long-winded answer to your question, Emily, but I just wanted to give some folks a little bit to see what's out there. And I'll go back to this main page for the moment there. So if you have any other thoughts there, let me know. I'm happy to talk about them, Emily.
That segues into, one thing that a response we always get when we start talking to people about compost is, this fear that it's going to stink, that it's just going to be an unmanaged pile of rotting vegetables. I think a lot of people have had potentially bad experiences with their own unmanaged backyard compost piles. And then the other thing we always hear is, well, what about rats?
Well, again, we're not talking about leaving a pile of garbage to rot. That is not composting. That's not managing a pile. That's not doing your work. And none of that is allowed under any of that's not allowed under so in a soil and water conservation plan, many of the standards of practice standards go back to the National Resource Conservation Service standards of practice that are national accepted farming practices. That's not allowed under that. It wouldn't be allowed in your soil and water conservation plan. It's not allowed under the regulations. And so, again, and it's not composting. And so if you're heating your piles up to the appropriate amounts, that heat, the animals don't like that heat. And so that usually takes care of rodents wanting to run around. Where you may run into some challenges, if you would, are in your raw materials piles. But the way to deal with that is you're never going to have, unless you're dealing with pure nitrogen and pure carbon in some crazy way that you would have that, you're always going to have something that has a little bit of both. So like grass has some carbon in it, leaves have some nitrogen in it. Okay, but there's books and books on how that works, and let's talk about that. So we have, this is the on-farm composting Bible. I don't know how well you can see that. This is the on-farm composting handbook. There's an on-farm composting field guide. Rodale, up my home state, Pennsylvania, up near Kutztown. Rodale has a book on composting. There's, Fletcher Sims composting. I brought a bunch of books. There's different training programs and field guides you can go. This is one from Elaine Ingham. I did her courses when she was the chief scientist out at Rodale, but she has programs with Soil Food Web. This was her guide 1 field guide. This is her field guide 2. These were for compost teas and actively aerated compost. There's some others. Eric Fisher's compost tea manual. So you can really get into it with some of this stuff as far as how deep you want to go and different recipes and stuff. But if you're doing it appropriately, the way it's recommended, you should. I like to have a lot of carbon that I can then, as soon as I get nitrogen material, I can immediately put it into a pile and start turning it. So I don't have those ingredient piles sitting around where you might start to have rodents, coming in like that. So that's the way I prefer to deal with it. Some people, if their operation and these bigger giant operations, they have self-contained areas that the rodents shouldn't be able to access it. But that's how we deal with that.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the things that got added in, especially after some of the environmental groups were worried, oh, well, there's just going to be piles of cucumbers sitting there waiting to be composted. And so it may have actually been your idea to say, well, let's get it immediately mixed with that woody material, and then we have that natural check and balance to make sure nobody's getting in over their head with getting in food scraps without a plan. There has to be a plan to immediately mix those.
Well, and again, that should, if you're following all the different plans and the regulations and how all that stuff is set up, it's all pretty clear in talking about trying to do that. It just makes sense, because obviously, I as a farmer, the sooner I can get, so we can talk about that a little bit with the nutrient management plan. I'm limited to when I can spread nutrients, and if you think about this, you don't want to be out there spreading a nutrient on your soil in the middle of winter when the ground is frozen solid. It can't do anything. It's not going to be able to get into the soil. Your earthworms, your microbes, all your soil biology is dormant right at that moment, or functionally not fully active. So we're limited to when we can spread those nutrients anyway. So if I have the ingredients, I want to get it mixed in and get it cooking as fast as I can because I want to get it out on the soil. It's not helping me sitting in the pile. It's helping me when it's out in the soil and all those microbes and bacteria and the fungi are doing their job in the soil. So if you think about it in those terms, we're prevented. I think it's December 15th to March 1st. Farmers are prevented from spreading any nutrients at all. So now there are extreme circumstances or emergencies where they can get a waiver from the Department of Ag, but again, that's so rare. But generally we're not allowed to do that, and so it's very important to understand that we're limited. So we want to get it working and get it out there as quickly as we can.
So a follow-up question on that. So you've referenced, that the regulations require the soil and water quality plans. What goes into those? Is there a specific group that's helping farmers make them?
So you have the National Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, and you have soil conservation districts. In Maryland, there's one in each county, two in Frederick. Baltimore City is, I believe, in the process. They might have just got one this last year, but they were in the process of getting one because we have so many urban farms, and so they could really use the help of the Soil and Water Conservation District and NRCS out there. But they've been working with Baltimore County primarily up to this point. So they are there for assistance for farms. There's cost share available. There's at the state level that's outside of Soil and Water Conservation Districts and NRCS, which is federal, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There's also state money that can be available for farms in certain water and manure practices, or nutrient management practices. If it's not always manure or urine, and so those are all available, and there's technical assistance available, what they call technical assistance, where you can call and ask for help. And so depending on the vastness or complexity of what you have and what you're doing, your plan is going to be shrink or grow depending on what you need. So there's no one size fits all type plan. If you're say dealing with say corn, and you're a grain farmer dealing with only corn, you may never do any composting at all. You may primarily deal with fertilizers that you apply, and then your nutrient management plan will reflect that. For someone like me, well, then I fall under the different composting regulations, and then I also have to test my compost. So we have, as part of our nutrient management plan, I'm only allowed to spread compost up to what the soil is able to take. So at a certain level, and some folks may have heard of the phosphorus management tool. There's essentially the University of Maryland did the research. They put out levels where your soil is supposed to be at. And so you can spread up to that limit, and then you're capped off. And so that's one of the nice parts about farmers being able to sell compost, because if for some reason your farm becomes capped off, that's an avenue that now you can still manage your nutrients, you can still do all that, and you can generate revenue through sales of your compost. It also, you don't, like in my case, the nutrients that say the phosphorus management tool, we're deficient on our soils. So I could probably spread till my last breath, and we wouldn't have any problems here on our farm triggering, any of that with our nutrient management plan. But if we need to generate some revenue, it's nice to know that we could sell it. And then there's a whole branch of regulations you have to do if you want to be able to sell it as well, that you have to do.
So, in describing your compost operation and similar operations on other farms, are these, permanent fixtures onto a farm, or like, how does that work?
Well, it depends. So again, there's no one size fits all. So because I try to do, we're trying not to we try to move things around on our farm. And so we don't have a permanent area where we necessarily always compost in that spot. And that's by design, because I want to be able to move things around where it's needed. And we do what's called rotational grazing. And so there's a program called management intensive rotational grazing. And folks joke that I do management intensive rotational composting. So, but other operations want it in a set spot. So they will. They might put in a permanent pad. There's cost share out there where you can put in various types of pads. You can put in concrete. Folks that have the financial means can put in all sorts of in vessel turning operations. Some places have. There's actively aerated systems where it's a static pile. There's under roof systems where they do that. There's under roof systems where they turn it. There's outdoor ones where they have special covers that allow air circulation but keep out moisture. So if you have the budget and you're able to do it, you could get as fancy or as low tech as you want with this. What you're essentially trying to do is make good quality compost that you can then use in some manner, shape, or form to the benefit of you or your business or the environment.
All right. Well, if anyone has questions, please put them in the question and answer, and we will get to them. So Keith, you mentioned that you do rotational grazing. So can you tell us a little bit? So you raise animals. What do you raise?
So we have livestock. We've had 5 different types of poultry over the years. Things change, depend on consumer demand and what's going on. COVID being the big one most recently. We've had ducks, geese, chickens, guinea chickens, and turkeys. We have honeybees. We have various types of rabbits. We have had goats, sheep. We have cattle right now. We've had hogs. Primarily, the hogs were the reason we were, making the compost. We're using the bedding and the manure to make the compost from the hog operation. So we also are a tree farm. So we've planted over probably 30,000 trees on the farm, or what's called a silvopasture. So we raise trees in rows, and some of those trees will become a living hedge, similar to in Europe. It creates a great wildlife corridor. It's great for your birds, for your small mammals, for your large mammals. It's just a great system. It's great for carbon sequestration. It's great for water retention. It's just a wonderful system for the environment. We participate in the Maryland nesting bird study, and we have a lot of birds here that you don't find readily in the rest of the county because we have so many trees. We have so much cover for them and so much food here. And then those trees also help provide food for our livestock. It also provides shade and shelter and help with keeping them cool. And so it's a very nice system that works all the way around. And the compost kind of integrates into it nicely. We have a lot of dung beetles and earthworms, and that helps cycle those nutrients into the soil profile so that I don't have to. We don't till. We're a no-till, essentially pasture operation. We leave the grasses tall, so that helps with keeping the soil cool at the soil level. It helps with moisture retention. The moisture is important for your soil microbes to stay active and keep those nutrients cycling. A lot of times folks will think of your soil just from a chemical profile, your NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, if you go and have a soil test done for your garden. But what they're forgetting is the vast majority of everything that's cycling in your soil is biological, done by what I call your critters, but your bacteria, your fungi, all your small little, mites and spiders and everything. That's where primarily all your nutrients are cycling. So I'm sorry. I see we have two questions here, but I can't see what they are.
Yeah, so one of the questions, and this may not be something you would know, but are there any like sustainable farming or composting groups or clubs in Washington County that you know of?
From a club standpoint, no, I'm not aware of that. But so Future Harvest is the regional sustainable agriculture group. They do West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, DC, and Delaware. I'm not aware that they have a club specifically for composting, but they do a lot with sustainable ag. In fact, I'm going to be doing a program. They're going to be doing an on-farm tour here in July 19th. Now, some of the extension master gardener programs have a master composter group as part of the master gardener program. So I know in the past, Howard County has had a master composter group. So it's possible that through the extension, through the master gardener program, that there is one in Washington County. I'm just not familiar enough with the Washington County master gardener program to know if they have one. Now, thankfully we're in the day and age of the internet, and so a possible search might help there. But the other thing is, if you're interested in starting one, I'm certain there's interest out there, because I know there's plenty of farmers out there that do this type of sustainable operation, and so I'm sure that if they're not there, you could look at it. Now, the Million Acre Challenge has various groups. They have a vegetable group, a grain group, and a livestock group. And probably, depending on which one you're ultimately interested in, we do talk a lot about that stuff in those groups, especially the market garden group as far as composting. But again, I'm part of livestock as well, and we talk about it in there mainly from a nutrient management perspective. So that I don't know specifically, but hopefully that can help guide you in the right direction.
Okay. We have a person who is shredding all junk mail and mixing it in with their kitchen scraps in the backyard compost bins. Is that a good idea?
Well, it depends when you say shredding all your junk mail. A lot of the junk mail that I get has plastic windows in the envelopes, and some of the paper is not necessarily a good fit. It'll break down, but it might not be the best for composting. I am very, very, very particular about what I put in my ingredients, because again, it's going out on my farm. This is where I live. I don't accept anything that has any level of trash whatsoever in it, or any kind of plastics, or anything like that. I'm very, very picky with what I take. So if I would be very careful and make sure you have some idea of what that paper is, and just make sure that you don't have anything that's going to trash it up, I guess would be my advice there.
So here's one about untilled pasture land.
Yes.
Probably something you're a bit more familiar with. So when a farmer spreads compost over untilled pasture land, does the compost just get spread on top? But how does that actually get into the soil?
Well, so again, it depends on, the answer is it depends. I try to do things. So I'll use the example of lime. Oftentimes, if you get a soil test, depending on where you are and what acreage you're talking about, you might get a recommendation from the soil test place that'll say spread 2 tons of lime per acre. Well, in a no-till situation, the challenge with spreading that 2 tons of lime per acre is you're not tilling, so you're not mixing that into the soil profile. And so what you can do is you can actually send your top 2 inches into an alkali situation instead of having an optimal pH system, optimal pH level there for your plants. And you can really throw off the balance of your soil that way in a no-till operation. So the way I prefer to do it is I put much smaller amounts out and give it a little time in between to work its way around. In my operation, because we have a very high life in the soil, when we participate in the soil health benchmark study, and so we have a lot of fungal and bacterial activity in the soil. As I mentioned, we have dung beetles, we have a lot of earthworms. And so when I put out a thin layer of compost, because our grass is tall, you don't even really know that it's there. For one, it's such a thin layer. And that biology works that into the soil pretty darn fast. Usually when we move our animals across the pastures, within 2 weeks, all those manure pats are gone. It's been taken in by the biology and worked into the soil. Now, if it was say, looks like a putting green type soil where they've for whatever reason the grass is really short, that's something where you'd have to be careful then how much you put down, because if you want it to ultimately get into your soil, not be washed away with a heavy rain. So that's where some of these other practices of leaving an 8-inch residual of grass on top when you graze and that sort of thing helps with mitigating any of that from happening. There's a lot that goes into that answer, so I'm trying to keep it short. But
well, I feel like the boilerplate answer for a lot of this, both the questions people are putting in the chat as well as the questions I've been answering, is one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, I mean,
what you're doing.
You are the operator. You are the manager of the operation as a farmer, and so you have to, like right now in our area, we had just come off, now not a California type drought, but we had very dry conditions here. So for our grasses, I pulled the livestock off the pasture and we started feeding some hay. We're getting rain now. I want to give the grass a chance to catch up. And so, that's a management decision as I'm looking, out in the fields and seeing how things are. And if I need to make some changes, well, then that's what we'll do. And then, we can graze them a little faster so they don't eat as much. So that keeps more grass there. There's a whole host of things as the operator that you can do to tweak and adjust what you're doing. And it's dependent on weather, the animals, the crop you're doing. There's a whole host of things that can influence what your decisions are, but ultimately you're the farmer and you try to flex with what you're given.
So a question about equipment. So you mentioned that you have a windrow turner. Is there anything specific that farmers have to use to get it out on the fields?
You can, I've seen smaller operations around the world where they haul it out in buckets, by hand. Wheelbarrows on the back of oxens, pulling carts, horses, donkeys, llamas. I mean, it really depends on the size of the operation and the finances available to the farm in order as a business, or a family operation, that you have available to make it work. You can use, the buckets of tractors, you can use manure spreaders, you can use wagons. I've shoveled out of the back of trucks, out of the back of wagons, whatever we had at the time that we were using and doing. So there's no real requirement or anything. It's just you're trying to get it out there. And again, you're hoping, you want to work it in, you want to have access to the soil life. And so you don't necessarily want to overload it in any one particular spot, unless you're, say you have a market garden and you're trying to, get that soil built up right there or whatever, so there's a balance there. And I guess the other thing just to mention, compost is not soil. So, if you're like what I do is if you compared my soil tests for nutrients and my compost test for nutrients, I have good compost, but it's not the same as soil. And so, that's why a lot of times market gardeners are mixing it in. It's not just straight compost, type thing. So if you raise it, depending on your compost, you could raise some pretty weak plants, depending on what your compost nutrients are versus what you could get with a good amended soil. That's why they call it a soil amendment. It's not necessarily a soil replacement, it's a soil amendment. So.
Well, and as we're closing out the evening, coming up to 8 o'clock, I want to bring it back full circle, sort of where we began. We're talking about soil right now, that this is a soil amendment, this isn't soil. And at the beginning of this evening, you were talking about how, how our food system is currently set is we are taking nutrients out of our soils, sending them to the grocery stores, and then sending those leftover nutrients to the landfill. So what does that mean for our soils, and how does compost play a role in building that back?
Well, the ideal, similar to that hierarchy that I mentioned, the ideal way is through the plants that you raise and the way you farm to not remove those nutrients in a significant amount to begin. And that takes a huge amount of work. And so this is no shame, no blame type thing. But what you have to understand is when a lot of people don't want to farm, there's a limit to how many people we have to work out in the fields. And when you have a limit on the number of people, you oftentimes have to go over to machinery to make up for that limit in human power. And one of the challenges we face is we have a much older farming population. And so physically, a lot of them can't do all that work. So they need to use the mechanical side of things. And so compost is heavy. If we can avoid trying to get it out in huge amounts, because when you make it, you're gonna it changes its composition from the original ingredients. Okay, and so it goes down in volume, and that's fine. But so you try to keep from having to spread a lot of it, but you get it out there if you can, you get it out there into the fields. And so that looks like folks going composting where they can. You and I had mentioned this before we even started. If everybody out there in the population composted all their food scraps, we wouldn't need any big facilities or anything at all. They could put it on their own little gardens. They could put it on their community gardens. They could spread it in their yards. But because folks aren't interested in doing that, we have to come up with other ways to do it. So we use, you have different programs that the counties offer. You have different programs that clubs will offer. The state, those types of things. There's other groups that out there that work together, and ultimately the farmers are a piece of that. And that's how we can, if we can get neighbors to work with farms that are doing composting. We can get that out of landfill back on the land. And for most part, the farmer will figure out how to get it back in their soil. But we just have to work with people that are interested in helping us. That's all. Does that answer your question, Emily? I'm trying to. There's a lot that goes into a lot of these answers, and so I'm trying to.
No, that was good. All right. Well, I am not seeing anything else in the question and answer. So, Keith, thank you so much for spending an hour with us this evening. I always appreciate listening to you talk about compost. You are such a wealth of information.
Well, always happy to be here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. On your 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock on your night. So then I'm sure we'll have some other stuff here in the future sometime, Emily. So hopefully folks will tune back in.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And everyone who is registered, I will be posting this up to YouTube and then sending everybody the link. So just bear with my schedule as I get that done. All right. Thanks, everyone.
I'll hang on here, Emily. I'll hang on here till we're done.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.